Namaste, everyone, and welcome back to the next series in our podcast series from the EkaShri Schools of Yoga, a nonprofit organization. And as we've done in the past, we kind of have been having these sets of different podcasts where we cover a wide variety of different topics, ranging from anything related to the Ashtanga yoga sequence to the most recently recorded podcast on Namaste. And so the goal of this series of episodes is really to take a look at various different topics that we have within yoga philosophy and really have a discussion around them, just dissect them and kind of see what the real world implications are of these different topics and how to think about applying them in our real life worlds. So if you do have any subjects or topics you would like to suggest, please feel free to email us at info@ekashri.yoga and definitely let us know. So Shriramji, thank you again for being here today. So as we mentioned before, right, today's session is going to be focused on sort of part two, if you will, of Namaste and what exactly it means. So last week we had a chance to kind of dive a little bit deeper into what the word Namaste actually means and in what context do you typically use it, and more broadly, how did the word come about and what should we really think when we hear or perform the greeting of Namaste. So today, why don't we start with what we had briefly touched upon last time, where Namaste is really the light bows down to light in you. So how can Shri, at a high level, and then maybe digging down a few more layers in depth, how can we really do this from a practical perspective?
Yes, thank you, Vedantji. So last week we spoke about the literal meaning of Namaste, namely, I bow down to you, I respect you, if we were to state it differently. And we can look at the deeper implications of that. I see the best in you, or I see the light in you, or I see the spark of divinity in you. And in order to state that and be sincere about it, we need to be in a good place ourselves. In other words, we need to be in a place of clarity, evenness of the mind. And in other words, we need to be established in the space of divinity within so that we can see the divinity in the other. Or to see the best in the other, we have to exhibit the best ourselves. We have to be in that place, which is in the parlance of yoga, it is called yogastha. Yogastha means to be standing in that place of yoga, to abide in that place of yoga, where we are connected with ourselves. So, from that vantage point, when we see the other, whoever we are interacting with, we are able to see the best in them. So, when we say namaste, that is what we are expressing. I see the best in you. And so, this is a sadhana. This is actually a practice of seeing the best in the other, because what they are expressing in this moment may not be exactly their best. Perhaps they're angry, or perhaps they're feeling some misery, or they're experiencing some negative emotions. Perhaps they're not expressing or experiencing the best of themselves. But how can we see the best in the other and invite them to be in that place where they see the best in themselves? You see, so that is a practice that we can do. And in fact, this is mentioned in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And I think today, in this episode of the podcast, it will be a good opportunity to delve into this specific abhyasa, this practice of how to connect with others and bring about the best in others, to see the best in the other and to invite them to be the best version of themselves.
And can we dig a little bit deeper into that, Shriramji? So I think because, when we typically think about the word namaste from a literal meaning perspective, right? I think we've typically associated it a lot more with the former, where it's like we are saying we see the best in you to kind of level set on that relationship. So it's very interesting that there's sort of this secondary aspect to it where we're also inviting them, right? To also maybe, like you mentioned, if they're in some kind of bad mood, if they're in some kind of disappointment, whatever it is, they have an opportunity to kind of now change that and see if they can come into a more positive sort of mental state and a more positive mood. So can we maybe unpack that a little bit more as to how if I were to say namaste to someone, that can kind of help trigger them to be the best that they can be just from purely doing this particular greeting and this word.
Yes. So perhaps they are not seeing the best in themselves in that moment. And when there is somebody else who we trust, who is able to see that, oh, you have so much potential, I see that in you, although you don't see it in yourself, then we allow them to open their eyes to it. Wow, I have this big treasure, a big potential inside me that I'm unaware of. So, thank you for pointing me to that. So, in order to illustrate that, perhaps I can narrate an experience from my own life. So, growing up in India, one of the things that we that is very what shall I say in the rat race of education. So one of the things that is many students pursue is entry into one of the prestigious Indian Institute of Technologies. So there's a very competitive entrance exam for that, which is called the JEE, Joint Entrance Exam. And when I was growing up, so I was preparing for the joint entrance exam, and it requires several years of preparation. So during my 8th grade to 12th grade, I actually prepared about 4.5 or 5 years and very intense study for it. And when I wrote the joint entrance exam, as I said, it was highly competitive. Only less than about 1% succeed, and they are offered a seat uh, uh, to study in one of these prestigious institutions. So when I wrote this competitive exam, the JEE, so I did not get it. So I was not in one of the top 1%, and I did not get it. And I was feeling very sad. Oh, maybe I don't have the potential to write this exam, to succeed in this exam. And I felt as if I failed in my pursuit. I So it was I would say, a little blow to my self-confidence. In fact, a big blow to my self-confidence. And I was feeling very low for several weeks. And so one day, my father, so he started a conversation, and he said, "Oh, I know that you are very intelligent, very bright. You are very sharp. Maybe this was just a statistical, chance. On that day, perhaps you are not feeling very well. Maybe you are too stressed out. So why don't you study one more year for it and then write the same exam the following year? Let's see what happens. I know that you will succeed because I know how intelligent you are." Now, I could sense that they were not simply empty words like a pep talk. It was not like that at all. He was saying that with so much sincerity and with so much conviction that it convinced me. Yes, I can do it. I have the potential to do it. So that conversation created a shift in my mind. And the next year, when I wrote the joint entrance exam, not only did I succeed, but I got like one of the 0.01% uh, rank, which allowed me to select the engineering discipline of my choice, which is a very big deal. So that was a very eye-opening experience for me because although I could not see the potential in myself, my father was able to see it, and he was able to express that to me and allowed me to see it as well. You see? So when we see the best in the other, then perhaps they are not seeing it in themselves, and we give them an opportunity that, wow, I am a good person. I have this potential. So we give them a gift.
I think that story is very interesting on multiple different levels, right? So one thing is, so like you mentioned, right, you have the basically the capacity to help people kind of realize their full potential, like you mentioned, when they're feeling down and stuff. And so I almost thought that this was kind of a third separate point when we think about this word, right? So one was that I had come into the meaning thinking like this is okay. For example, if you're temporarily down, let's just say to some emotional thing or something like that, you consciously know you're down, right? But then um, and so when someone maybe says the word namaste to you, that then leads you to be like, okay, let me then just go and adopt, a positive attitude for the rest of, the day or whatever, and keep up that attitude in order to have a positive outlook towards life. So that's the way I kind of came in to this, anecdote, thinking the definition would be. But what's interesting about this is that it seems like you can also use the concept of namaste as a tool to have people sort of recognize the potential within themselves when they themselves don't recognize it, right? And so it seems like those two things are slightly different in my personal view, which is a very interesting concept, right? Because one is like you understand, okay, temporarily you're down, but you'll kind of come out of this sooner rather than later, and you can easily consciously change that. But then on the other side, it's like, okay, maybe like you mentioned the first time you took the exam, right? Which is a common thing for people. I don't think there's any person in the world who's ever gotten everything they've wanted on the first shot consistently, right? And so people have to, you failed in order to like learn from it and go from there. And so that's very interesting how the even though this isn't necessarily the concept of like saying the word namaste, but nevertheless the same kind of meaning and implication is here, whereby you can use it as a tool to really empower people to kind of realize and understand that they are maybe a lot smarter than they thought they were. They can achieve things that they may not have necessarily thought before. So thank you very much, Shriramji, for sharing that anecdote. I think that's incredibly interesting, and just I think a lot of interesting things to really pull out of that.
Yes, in fact, I think you stated it perfectly. Namaste is like an entry point, and there is deeper levels of this practice where we not only see the best the moment that we say namaste, but then we are able to transform the other by inviting them to that place of being their best. So we see this in a lot of examples. For example, um, when there is a very good mentor or a coach who is able to see the potential, so they inspire the students to be in that place where they can express their full potential. Because somebody can be highly talented, but if they don't know that they are talented, or if they think that they're inadequate, then perhaps they're not harnessing the power of their talent. So the presence of a mentor or a coach, or in the Indian tradition, a guru. A guru is someone who's not just a teacher, but who inspires us to be the best version of ourselves, because they see the full potential that is uh, that is within us, and perhaps it is right now occluded from our vision, whereas a guru can see that. So that is the power of having such a person in our life.
Wonderful, wonderful. Um, so let's maybe transition to the next sort of, I think, logical question from here, which is that it's easy for us to see the best, I think, in the others when it's very obvious. So for example, like you mentioned, the visible way of this is if you see someone who's incredibly talented, or when they are serving, helping others, you kind of see this action physically, and therefore can kind of easily recognize the people, the best within them, just because you have this sort of visual cue or some kind of physical cue to guide you towards this best in other people. But when they're exhibiting the opposite, right? So for example, when they're making mistakes, when they're angry, how do you think about separating the emotions you may feel as an individual, right? So for example, if you see someone, let's just as an example, as being mean to someone, being rude to someone else, you would automatically sort of associate that person with being a negative person, someone who typically is maybe a rude person and just not a good human being overall. So how do you think about, on a personal level, when you go about doing the greeting of namaste and everything that comes with it, about leaving these external sort of baggage that you think about people behind, how should you as an individual think about consciously thinking through that so that when you do say the word namaste or do this greeting, it's not superficial, but rather it's more heartfelt. So if that question makes sense. So I know it's a little bit abstract, but at the same time, I think that's an important point for us to be able to distill down, because I'm just thinking as, a very junior person who's new to this particular concept, if I do, if I bow down and say the word namaste to someone to greet them, how do we think about not just saying it for the purpose of saying it, but rather truly, meaning it when you don't really see the light or the divine in someone else because of some pure action that you may have witnessed that puts them in a negative light.
You are right. In some people, when they're already expressing their best, so the best version of themselves is so obvious, we are able to see the spark of divinity there. In other words, it's so visible, it's so obvious. Now, just because they're exhibiting the opposite doesn't mean that the spark of divinity is not there within them. It is just hiding. And there's an art or there is a practice through which we can find that spark of light within them. In other words, the best version, the highest potential is hiding within them. And one of the practices in yoga that Patanjali suggests in the Yoga Sutras is the practice of seeing the best in the other, regardless of what they are expressing through their actions or through their words. You see, right now in this moment, they might be angry, or right now they may be sad, or right now they are miserable because they experience failure. Maybe like the first time I attempted the joint entrance exam, um, because I did not get through, I thought I'm not cut out for it. So during such experiences, how can we find the best in the other, regardless of what visible events are going on in their life? You see, and that is a practice. And he calls it Eka Tattva Abhyasa. Eka Tattva Abhyasa. What it means is, Abhyasa means practice. Eka Tattva means the practice of seeing the single essential principle. This is a very powerful practice. What is the single essential principle that is residing in the heart of all beings? So that is the spark of divinity. The forms, the outer forms can change, our emotions can change. But when we cut to the core of who they are, is this spark of divinity. And in order to connect with that, in order to see that, is a practice. And this practice is called Eka Tattva Abhyasa. And Patanjali states that in one of the sutras, that Pradishedartham Eka Tattva Abhyasaha. And we can go into many layers of meaning. For example, the word tattva is a overloaded word, especially in Sankhya and yoga. In one of the future sessions, we can explore this a bit more. But when we see the phrase Eka Tattva, that means the single principle, the single essential principle, it refers to the soul of something, the core of something. You see, and what is the core of a person? It is the self that is illumining the body, illumining the mind. So the spark of divinity that resides in them, and the practice of seeing that, the best version of them. This practice is called Eka Tattva Abhyasa. Now let us put it in practical terms of how to do this practice in real world. You see, because as we saw before, some people are highly talented and the spark of divinity is very obvious to see. For some others, it is not very obvious, but we know that it is still there. And how can we connect with that? So in order to help us with this practice, Patanjali categorizes people into four types. Four types of people. What are the four types of people? He says people who are happy, people who are sad, and then people who are doing good actions or virtuous acts. And the fourth type of people is people who are not doing virtuous action. Maybe they're making mistakes, or maybe they're doing some things to create disharmony in their surroundings. They're disruptive, right? So four types of people. These are called Sukha, Dukkha, Punya, and Apunya. Sukha means people who are happy. Dukkha, people who are sad or miserable. And then people who are virtuous, third, punya. And then the fourth is apunya, people who are doing the opposite of that, namely, they're causing some destruction or perhaps they're doing some mistakes and so forth. So these are the four types of people. And Patanjali gives us a very beautiful sutra where he says, in order to see the spark of divinity in each of these four types of people, we have to perceive them from a different vantage point. We have to relate to them in a slightly different way. As they say, perspective creates perception, right? The way we behold things, the beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder. So we need to see them differently from a different angle in order to see the spark of divinity in them. So the wisdom that Patanjali gives is for the first type of people, people who are happy, he says offer Maitri. Maitri means friendliness. Be friendly with those who are happy. Because when you see your friend happy, you also become happy. And when we are happy, we are established in that space of divinity. So the divine in me recognizes the divine in you. It becomes a very easy thing. That practice becomes very easy. Now, sometimes the opposite may happen, right? Because instead of being happy that the friend is happy, if the mind says, oh, I'm jealous of them, they are happy, but I'm miserable, life is not fair. If the mind rebels like that, then we are setting up for not seeing the spark of divinity in them. So Patanjali suggests if negative emotions or negative thoughts uh, appear in the mind when you see a happy person, just change it, see it differently, treat them as a friend, so that when you see your friend happy, then you also become happy and we are able to see the spark of divinity in them. So that is for the first type of people. For the second type of people, namely people who are in this moment, they are sad or miserable. For them, Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras, he says, do not stop with friendship, do not stop with Maitri. We need to transform that friendliness to compassion or karuna. He uses the word karuna. Have compassion for them. In other words, right now they are having a not so good experience. They're going through some pain or suffering. So let me be an instrument that can uplift them rather than trying to say to them, oh, uh, you are right now in this miserable position because you did this mistake, rather than trying to point out to them why they are suffering. Because you had junk food, that's why you have a tummy ache now. That is the opposite of compassion. So, what compassion says is that it doesn't matter how you got here, it doesn't matter how you got to this point of suffering. Right now, I see that you are seeking relief from suffering. So, how can I help you? So, that is compassion, that is karuna, you see. And then the third type of people, people who are doing good work, people who are doing good work, appreciate them. And Patanjali uses the word mudita. Mudita means appreciation. It also means to be happy for them. Just like how a mother is happy when she sees the child excelling in something. You see, when the child is doing some great work, maybe they did excellent in the academics or in the exam, or they created a beautiful work of art, and the mother feels so good. So that is an example of mudita. So when you see somebody doing uh, very good action, virtuous actions, when they are excelling, then offer that same mudita. Be happy for them, just like a mother is happy when a child does something excellent, and appreciate them, appreciation or mudita. Because when we do that, we don't allow the mind to find fault or nitpick. You see, sometimes the mind or the ego tries to find fault when somebody is doing very good work. oh, if I were doing it, I would have done it better. So that kind of attitude is the opposite of mudita. So mudita is to appreciate and to be happy for them. And finally, the last one is apunyam, people who are doing mistakes, or people who are causing some destruction or disharmony in their surroundings or with the people who are with them. So the best way to attend to them or relate to them would be through upeksha, is what Patanjali suggests. What is upeksha? Upeksha means not to give too much importance to the specific actions that they are doing. Be indifferent to what they are doing, but have an attitude of they know not what they are doing. You see, they think that by doing these actions that they're going to experience some joy. They're seeking joy. They're disconnected from themselves, and that is why they're compelled to do these actions, and so have this space of being indifferent to the specific words they say to insult people, or being indifferent to the actions that they're doing that causes destruction to the society and so forth. So what it says is, although the actions that you are doing are exhibiting disharmony, I know that in your heart you are a good person. You see, I see that the potential in you is there. I see the potential in you. You are a good person. And that is what is Upeksha. And this is ties in nicely with the example that I stated about the exam that I had to write again. And so my father was able to see the best in me, although the evidence was the opposite. The evidence was that I had failed the exam in my first attempt. And if we go only by the evidence, then one could say that I don't have the potential, or I'm a failure. So that kind of judgment or a label might stick. But Upeksha says, no, don't judge them by their actions. Go deeper and see the potential behind them. That is what Upeksha is. You see, being indifferent to the specific
So
action or what they did as a mistake and see beyond that. That is Upeksha. In fact, the word Upeksha itself, Ikshati means to see, and Upa Iksha means um, do not see directly, see something else. That is Upeksha. Upa means lower. So don't gaze at the mistake directly, look elsewhere. So, in order to drive home this point, my teacher used to give a very beautiful analogy. So, a person had lost their key in the garden and they're frantically searching for the key. And a passerby comes and asks, oh, where did you lose your key? And he says, over there, I lost my key. And the passerby was surprised. Why are you searching here? And he says, oh, this is where there is light. It is bright here. It is easy to search. But where I lost my key, it is very dark, very difficult to search. You see? So whenever we see any evidence of, there is a mistake, there's a spotlight that is shining on that mistake, then it is obvious that the mistake is very obvious. But what Upeksha, Patanjali suggests, the practice of Upeksha means don't focus there where the mistake has the spotlight. Look elsewhere, and then you will see the spark of divinity in them. You will see the potential that is hiding in them. So this is what is Upeksha. And of course, uh, although Patanjali talks about these four different categories of people, we can be in these four categories at different times. At one time, I might be a happy person. Another time, I might experience sadness. Sometimes I might be doing excellent work. Sometimes I make mistakes. So we go through each of these four buckets or each of these four categories. And depending on um, what the other person is going through, we can connect to them in these different ways. So let me quote the full sutra where Patanjali gives this wisdom. He says, Maitri Karuna Mudita Upekshanam Sukha Dukkha Punya Punya Vishayanam Bhavanatas Chitta Prasadanam. So, to summarize this sutra, offer Maitri or friendliness to Sukha people, happy people. Offer compassion towards people who are experiencing sadness or misery. Offer Mudita, appreciation towards people who are doing good work. And offer Upeksha, indifference to people who are doing not so good work. And it's interesting that many times we see the opposite. People who are doing not so good work, we see a lot of news about them. The newspapers or the news media is full of articles about people who are doing obnoxious things. Right? If somebody is doing great work, we don't see them in the first page of the news. So, interestingly, much of the opposite is going on. But with the practice of yoga, when we use these principles as the abhyasa that Patanjali suggests, um, it opens our eyes to a new way of connecting with people and connecting with the best of what they have to offer.
Wonderful. So thank you so much for really eloquently describing all these different types. And I think this makes a lot of sense and hopefully will give all the individuals listening a sense of how to really think about the practical aspects and sort of the conceptual um, foundational elements behind what we just discussed. So I guess one natural follow-up question, Shriramji, to this concept, right, is that if we are naturally looking to see the best in individuals and naturally looking to see and pull out the best in individuals, how do we think about, where at a certain point, maybe this individual isn't really as benevolent as maybe we once thought, right? So is there a line to draw, like, for example, if we've been trying to seek that positivity in that particular individual, but it's still not coming, and then we therefore conclude that, okay, maybe this individual is not a, maybe a good person. So how do we think about drawing the line as to what, is the right amount to keep trying to seek this, higher state of being within in an individual? And if there's no outcome in getting there, where do you like draw the line and think about that?
Yes, in fact, for a yogi, there is no such person who cannot, uh, who does not have that spark of divinity. You see, the yogi has so much conviction. The strength of conviction is so strong. In fact, they know deep in their heart that all beings, they have this best, the spark of divinity that is residing in everybody. And so when somebody has the strength of conviction, then being around them can be an agent of transformation, right? So that brings also one more very interesting point. Suppose we uh, suppose we encounter somebody who is doing some destructive work. Now, being indifferent to that, being offering upeksha or being indifferent to that, does not mean that we allow them to do what they want, allow them to abuse or torture or destroy others. That is not the intent here at all. So the intent here is do the necessary things to stop the abuse. Or, for example, if they are doing something destructive, perhaps it is wise to call the law enforcement or whatever. All the practical things need to be done. But what yoga says is do not judge them as a bad person. In other words, we can change the perspective to, oh, right now they are in a place of ignorance. They know not what they are doing. They think that this will bring them happiness, but they are mistaken right now. They are good person in the heart of hearts. The soul, the in their heart is the spark of divinity is there. They are good, but right now they are having some misunderstanding. They do not know how to experience happiness. They think doing actions through this means will bring them happiness, but it doesn't. So, having the conviction that they are good, they are just mistaken. They are confused about what brings them happiness. So do not judge them as a bad person. That is what is implied here.
Wonderful. And so maybe the appropriate thing to end on then, Shriramji, from this conversation would be, we've touched upon this in various different, I think, aspects of the conversation today, but what maybe would you leave our listeners with in terms of practical advice when it comes to all of these different things we've talked about, right? Because I think, we've definitely made the argument for why a lot of these things should be the way they are conceptually, and how from the most idealistic version of a person, you want to be, for example, recognizing the good in a person, not judging them, etc. But I think it's definitely easier to discuss these things than it is to apply in practice. So maybe what parting words would you leave our listeners with when it comes to actually thinking about the practical applications of these different concepts, and how to actually think about applying this in a way where they can make a habit out of it, such that they can then internally feel a lot more fulfilled, and I guess just much better of an individual when they interact with another person, and therefore elevate the nature of that relationship.
Yes. So first of all, it is very interesting to see that in the practice of yoga, it is not just postures, the asanas, and the breath work, the pranayamas. Whatever we do inside the yoga mat is just one facet of yoga practice. But yoga practice is much more than that. As we saw today, yoga practice also involves the practice of seeing the best in the other, as Patanjali states in the Yoga Sutras. So that is one thing that I find very fascinating, because in all spheres of life, the wisdom of yoga can be applied. It is not that when I'm inside the yoga mat, I am a yogi. When I step outside the yoga mat, I am a bhogi, the opposite of a yogi. It's not like that at all. We can apply the wisdom of yoga in every moment of our life, including when we are interacting with people. How can we strengthen the relationship with people? How can we see the best in the other? So, this is something very fascinating. We can apply yoga, we can use the opportunity when we interact with people as a moment to practice these teachings, the wisdom that we discussed today. So, in order to practicalize it, that means how to make it second nature. So, we need to um, be aware of when we interact with people, how does the mind respond? When we see a happy person, how does it respond? How can I connect with them with friendliness? If I see a sad person, how do I relate to them? If they are sad, and if I also become sad, then we are not solving the problem. Now we have just created two sad people. We have increased the number of sad people on this planet. So, how can I become compassionate so that I relieve their suffering, so that I benefit the world? You see? So, whenever we encounter people in our day to day interactions, maybe having in the back of the mind, ah, which category do they belong? And then how can I connect with them through the wisdom of yoga, connecting with friendliness with happy people, compassion with sad people, and with people who are doing good work, appreciation, and then indifference towards people who are doing destructive work or who are doing mistakes. Suppose we see in a situation where somebody has done a mistake, right? And rather than making them feel miserable, pointing out the mistake to them, oh, because of this, you have ruined our plan. So rather than making them suffer for that mistake, because they're already feeling bad that they made the mistake. Now, we don't want to make it more intense with our words. So, by being indifferent to their actions, we are actually depersonalizing it. Oh, mistake happened. Rather than saying you made that mistake, a mistake happened. You see? So that way we don't associate that they're doing with intention. They intentionally did it. So that is a way in which we can apply upeksha. In other words, as my one of my teachers, Sri Ravi Shankarji, he says very beautifully, do not see intentions behind other people's mistakes. Do not see intentions behind other people's mistakes. And this is a very powerful practice. And this embodies what Upeksha is. So these are some ways in which we can put this wisdom of how to connect with people in practice.
Wonderful. And I think that's an excellent way to end um, the topic for today. So thank you so much, Shriramji, for this very enlightening conversation. I think it's incredibly important for us, right, to really bring awareness. So the next time, in the Indian tradition, when you think about bowing down to someone and doing the word namaste, which is really prominent in our day-to-day lives, I think it would be, I think, just elevate the nature of the relationship if the next time we actually went ahead and did something like that, we take the time as we're doing it to mentally think through, what are we trying to get out of this, sense of doing this namaste bow down. And I think if our listeners are able to start thinking about that over the next couple of times they do this, I think they will start to realize that, you can really elevate the relationship to a whole new level. And at this point, you're actually consciously thinking about, trying to find the best in others. And that will, I think, then lead to a much more fulfilling and holistic interaction with the other people, like we've mentioned. So thank you very much for the conversation today. And, if you have any last thoughts, feel free to share. Otherwise, we can go ahead and continue with our podcast series starting from next week.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vedanji. And thanks everyone for tuning in and listening to this episode.
Thank you very much. Namaste, Shriram. Fitting, I think, end to the podcast. And we'll look forward to seeing all the listeners again next weekend for our next series of podcast episodes and beyond.
Thank you. Namaste, Vedanji, and namaste, everyone.